And welcome back to another edition of VADA Live. I'm your host, Dan Carrigan, and today we're talking about an important topic, but let's admit it, it may be something that is not on top of the priority list right now, and that topic is estate planning. Well, thankfully, I'm joined by an expert to help break it all down. His name is John Dedon, and he's an estate planning trust attorney at Cameron, Ingersoll, and Roche, PLLC. John, thanks for joining VADA Live.
Dan, great to be here. Thank you.
And one great thing about having you on, John, is that you'll be joining us. You're on the agenda for the VADA convention at the Omni Homestead, and that is June 8th to the 11th. What can dealers expect from you presenting? What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I'm looking forward to being there. Thanks for the invitation, Dan, and VADA for the invitation. You know, it's going to be, I think, an interesting session because it's going to be interesting not just for the dealers, but for everybody that's sitting in that room, because even dealers start at the same place as everyone else. We will cover a few core topics, the core topics being what are the right tools to use, powers of attorney, medical directives, wills, and trusts. Then we'll get into, well, how do assets actually pass upon death? Because we need to make sure that's all coordinated with the documents. And then as we get to the dealers specifically, we'll get into the tax issues. And of course, the tax issues are so important because that's how we pass the dealerships and the real estate to family, or simply to preserve their estate. So those are the three general topics that we will cover. And as I said, they're applicable to virtually everyone that will be sitting there.
Why, amid all the priorities right now in busy auto dealerships and lots, is this something to really turn your attention to at the moment?
Well, you know, it's a great question. Why should they? Simply because inevitably they have to. You know, you hear about death and taxes, and certainly the dealerships that I've worked with in Northern Virginia and throughout the state, sooner or later you get into how am I going to preserve what I worked so hard to develop, either to maximize upon a sale or to pass down to the next generation. And that gets you into, well, in large part, oftentimes the vast majority of the assets are illiquid. So it's not as if just having money in an account, paying tax and passing it down. So there's really two major prongs to preserving it. One prong is simply the estate tax. We still do have estate tax. You know, currently, it's as advantageous as it has ever been. A husband and wife can protect $28 million. But that law may sunset. It may sunset in 2026, in which case it would be cut in half, essentially. It is indexed for inflation. It would be cut in half. And, you know, why this is so timely is because the president, one of his initiatives is to not let the law sunset, but to extend these tax cuts that he, in fact, authored back in 2016. So maybe by June we will know some more. Maybe we won't. But at a minimum, the incentive to make planning now is to lock in and grandfather that $28 million exemption or the $14 million if you're single, before the law may sunset. So that's one prong, the tax. It's so prevalent. The other issue is simply, regardless of whether there's a state tax or not, it's just the succession planning that's important for so many dealerships who may have children in the business. Some may be in the business, some may not. So how do you design that to do what's fair in the eyes of mom and dad? So those are two kind of reoccurring major themes I see over and over with my clients.
As far as the estate planning and succession planning, those are terms people, use, and I think there may be some overlap there. Can you lay that out for folks too on how they're really, I guess, coordinated? That overlap of your C of Venn diagram, I'm sure, is there, but not quite the same thing.
Well, I think estate planning is really simply all-encompassing for anybody who's concerned about how their assets pass upon death. So what I mean by that is there's different stages of estate planning depending on the complexity, depending on the family relationships, depending on the net worth. Net worth isn't always the driving factor. Estate planning can involve children from different marriages. You know, for every Ozzie and Harriet, for your dealers who are older, they don't even remember Ozzie and Harriet, perhaps. But for every Ozzie and Harriet with children from the same marriage, there's a number of Brady bunches. So family relationships are important. And then, of course, the net worth issue because of what we talked about with the estate tax exemption. So estate planning, even for people who don't have a significant high net worth estates, is very important to make sure assets go where you want them to go. The core documents for everybody, should be a power of attorney, a medical directive, a will, and a revocable trust to avoid probate. Everybody should have those documents, and that's kind of the foundation of an estate plan. You then layer on top of those core documents additional strategies if you need to combat the estate tax.
And as far as getting started, is there anyone that, okay, I'm hearing you, John, where do I really take that first step?
Yeah, well, that's why when I see clients, even if they're dealers and have significant assets, that's why I always say, hey, look, let's not get overwhelmed by this process. Let's just look at fundamentally, where are we starting with where you want your assets to go? Are you married? Are they going to a spouse? Are we protecting them for the spouse? Are they going then to children at the second death? Where does charity fit in? So these are plain English, simple questions. It's then up to somebody like me who has the tools that we then apply to accomplish the objectives. So I don't like to overwhelm people with information. You know, that's not productive. You just start with the essentials, basic questions. You do stage one. And then, as I said earlier, if we need to, because of the net worth, you layer on top of those core documents with all the fancy things that many of your dealers have probably already heard about. Things like SLATs and CRUTs and donor advised funds. Those are just tools. You know, tools are meaningless. We just want to know in plain English, how do we accomplish your objectives? And that's why it's so important to listen and learn before you get into what the solutions are.
Are you seeing any patterns, John, and a lot maybe thinking, okay, there's a certain point in my career where I can turn my attention to these topics with X number of years and experience? Are there, and I'm sure your recommendation is probably the sooner you start, the better. Are dealers doing that more? Are some getting more prepared in this area? Are there any trends there?
Well, I'm only smiling because, you know, ideally the earlier the better. But let's face it, as a practical matter, there's other priorities in life. Unless there's a triggering event like a health issue, or sometimes there's a sale of a business that's a triggering event. Sometimes there's a law change like we expected if we had seen a different result with the election. These are all kinds of events that may motivate a client to act more quickly. But other than that, I think it's more of just dealers being beaten down by accountants and financial planners and by their lawyers saying, sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with this. And so they bite the bullet, and sooner or later, they deal with it. Or at least you hope they do.
I hear you there. Is there anything really thinking pragmatically that dealers can do to help ensure when you talk about something, as you mentioned, a business transition can really happen smoothly? Any recommendations or insights there?
Well, that's really where you get into the strategies. They need to find somebody who's been down this road before. You know, typically what I see, oftentimes a dealership's assets are with the stores, the business themselves, and with real estate. And oftentimes what we do is we handle it in stages. The real estate has become so valuable. We look to how can we transfer the real estate. Maybe the business itself is a second step, or it's not done immediately because we focus on kind of the lowest hanging fruit. And if the real estate is so valuable, that's typically easier to transfer. The one thing, Dan, I will note is when you look into gifting and grandfathering in while we have these high exemptions, we do it in a way where the dealers have the most control that they can. Because normally when I talk about all these strategies and how to save 40 cents on the dollar, because the estate tax rate is 40%, they look at me and say, hey, this sounds great. I'm all in. I want to save 40 cents on the dollar, but I'm not 105 years old. How am I going to retain control and access so I have not forfeited the lifestyle I have? And that's where the rubber meets the road. And I assure you, there are strategies that allow us to do that.
As far as mistakes, anything that you see that happens often with dealers in the area?
Well, probably the biggest mistake is just kind of the head in the sand, the failure to act, because inevitably there can be somewhat a mess. I was involved with a client who had a few dealerships, and we had several meetings. The CPA was involved, but nothing ever happened. It wasn't because of the tax strategy. We had focused on the tax strategy. The issue was of 3 children, 2 were in the business and 1 wasn't. So there is an example where they just could not figure out what was going to be the optimal conclusion. But if nothing is done, then it's kind of a free-for-all. They at least could have planned their own solution, even if perhaps they didn't think they ever got to the perfect solution. So, it's the failure to act. Sometimes it's just letting the perfect being the enemy of the good. Anything that's done is going to be better than just having it left as a mess for somebody.
And any quick tips that could save dealers time, money, headaches down the road from your side?
Well, I would say the lowest hanging fruit of all of this is you at least need to have wills and trusts in place. You do not want to go through probate. Probate is not a tax, but it is a huge hassle. It's a big expense, and it's going to just frustrate the heck out of whoever steps up to be the executor. And you can have several $100 million and you can avoid probate without affecting you in the least, just by making sure you have your fundamental documents in order and you coordinate title and beneficiary designations. If you do nothing else but make sure you take care of those core essentials, you will have helped your family a lot.
And just a really simple question, John, though it may be helpful for those listening and hearing and seeing this. Probate, why is that so important? Why is that a priority?
Well, probate is simply the process where the local jurisdiction, regardless of where you live in Virginia and regardless of if you've moved to Florida or California, that local jurisdiction is saying to you, hey, if you don't take steps to remove us from your death process, we need to make sure these assets go where they're supposed to and the creditors get paid. And if they need to make sure that's done correctly, the local jurisdiction needs a boatload of information. So that's where the complication comes in. You have the ability to say, don't worry about it, local jurisdiction. We will handle it ourselves because of revocable trust, title, and beneficiary. But if you simply have a will does not avoid probate. If you don't have a will, certainly you're not avoiding probate. So this probate process for a dealer who owns businesses is likely to be 2 years or more. And that's where the expense mounts up. So it's kind of voluntary to avoid it if you want to take the steps to do so.
And John, we mentioned at the top of this segment, you will be at the VADA convention at the Omni Homestead. What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I'll see some familiar faces there. So I'm looking forward to the relationships. You know, the most important thing I find, whether it's on the personal side or on the business side, is really relationships. There's plenty of competent professionals that you can work with. You just want to work with somebody that you are comfortable with. And so I certainly are looking forward to that, to renewing relationships with the VADA people. And I've been there before, so it'll be a pleasure to return.
Well, John, thanks for taking time to join VADA Live. We mentioned the convention. If you want to hear more and actually find more, everything, it's all in one place, VADA.com/convention. I was joined by John Dedon. John, appreciate your time talking estate planning and more insights for dealers all around. That's it for this segment of VADA Live. I'm Dan Carrigan. See you next time.